Hey everyone, Yan Zhao here tonight with Ishi the Grey, author extraordinaire, Scars, World War Kaiju. Oh, hang on. Every time I do this, I forget to shut the other window I have open.
Oh, okay, no problem.
So I hear myself. There we go. It's been one of those weeks. All right. So thanks for coming on. Tonight's topic, mythology. So why do
Yes.
certain myths last through the ages, and why do modern myths suck and disappear in 5 minutes?
Oh, that is an incredibly timely subject. An incredibly timely subject, isn't it?
Yeah, there. I was thinking about this for a few reasons. People still talk about all the classics. Certainly all the biblical ones, Greek gods, Roman gods, Norse gods, Ayurveda, or not Ayurveda, the Vedic
Yeah.
writings. All this stuff lasts from thousands of years ago, but then for some reason, like every time a new movie with a female superhero lead comes out, they're promoting it like it's the first time ever, even though we just had one last year.
Yeah. Yeah, we're kind of in this bizarre time in which I think partially it's a failing of our education system. I think it's strangely enough a failing of, this is going to sound strange, uh, maybe when we were all younger, there was such a thing as reruns. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of old television and a lot of old movies were ran over and over again. Um, that
All those UHF
knowledge,
channels.
yeah, that too, and cable, and for some reason, it's this younger generation right now. Couldn't say about Gen Z, but millennials seem to have been deprived of a lot of that. The fact that you had Twilight fans who had never heard of the werewolf
Mm-hmm.
and really thought Twilight was the first time anyone had ever done werewolves, which is an insane cultural ignorance. Um, but yeah, there just seems to be no real knowledge of the classics, or I don't know. The other thing is, I recall when I was younger, in high school and college, you'd fall into a subculture and they had their own history and lineage and things that were important. There were
Mm-hmm.
bands that you all had to check out to really appreciate it. There were books you had to read. It was like every goth had read The Stranger, for instance. Um, and, every goth also read Anne Rice, and there were all these different things that kept, Poe. You go down the list, um, and for some reason that does not appear to exist right now. That the current generation has been deprived of that, or just unaware of it. Maybe it's a failing by parents. I honestly couldn't say why. Um,
I have a theory, but
yeah,
we'll come back to that later. Because if you don't mind, let's kind of start at the beginning. So, I identify as Catholic, and most people who have some religion would say that there is an objective truth and an objective structure to the world, and myths work in the long term because it either adheres to that structure or whether it's set by like an intelligent being or there's like a natural flow to the universe, and these kind of stories follow it. I think I've heard you say that you're an atheist.
yeah.
So would you also say that there is, clearly not like a divinely created structure to the universe, but there's like a way that the universe works or that it should be?
Well, okay, we're going on the macro scale now. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I grew up. I think my parents, maybe they didn't know it at the time. I grew up on Greek and Norse myths and
Mm-hmm.
Star Trek and Star Wars, as well as other mythologies. And so when my mother started trying to give me Catholicism, initially I just came at it as, okay, well, this is just today's myths. Back then they had, Zeus and Hera and all the various legends to explain their universe because they didn't understand it. I just figured, okay, my mind took it for, okay, that's just what we're doing here now. These are the new ones, or they came along later. This is our culture's myths that help us understand these things and pass on morals and such. And it was quite a shocking day in catechism when I said that out loud and got into a hell of a lot of trouble. I didn't realize people actually thought angels were real. It was like, oh, whoops. And I don't know, I've just always had a very difficult time with the miracle aspect. And yeah, I definitely went through my phase of not liking Christianity. Now, granted, in the 80s, the fundamentalists did Christianity no favors. I mean, there was some real bullying going on. There was this church, I think, called the Harvest Church in my community that really went out of its way to harass people and be obnoxious. But as I got older, I found myself in my own writing repeatedly going back to not just mythological symbolism, but specifically Christian symbolism over and over again in my writing. And I asked myself, if I'm an atheist, why do I keep going back to these? And I didn't really have the language yet or the vocabulary to describe in my mind or quite verbalize what I was thinking. And then lo and behold, a couple of years later, Jordan Peterson shows up and explains, well, this is why. And it's like, oh, okay. It all makes sense now. And it was kind of the little missing puzzle piece for me. I mean, I'd already kind of reached that point, but he put it into words and gave it a formalized structure to think about it in. And for me, it's just clear that even though I just can't accept the miracle aspect, knowing how religions form and how cultures form and the science aspect, the miracle part is very, very much not of me. So, but at the same time, I see these stories as being incredibly critical. We developed them for a reason. They came about for a reason, and they've served us extremely well. You could say it came from a divine creator. Maybe it was divinely inspired, or maybe this was the winning strategy that evolved out of us where these morals worked best. Frankly, it doesn't matter in my opinion. I mean, I often bring this up. I know me and my obsession with rats, but I see rats show compassion and empathy and guilt. And, these are complex concepts that, we usually associate to I guess, cognitive thinking and philosophies, but clearly on some degree, they evolved this too. So there is a purpose to it. Clearly it matters. And again, you can go back, if you're Christian, you can say, well, of course, God evolved that into them.
Yeah, that's kind of the easy answer.
Yeah, well, and it's just as valid. But ultimately, we as a culture developed these stories and these morals, and they've provided the most fair and, frankly, the best society that's ever existed and the most equitable society that's ever existed. We abandoned them at our own peril. And, frankly, what we've been able to achieve through these morals, you might as well call it a miracle. I mean, where we're at. It's just, it doesn't really, ultimately, when it comes down to it, these stories are deeply ingrained in our mind. These values are deeply ingrained in our mind, and they matter, and they matter deeply. One thing that always bothered me, even before I'd come to these conclusions as an atheist, it always bothered me that you would always get the line, oh, all religions essentially believe the same thing. It's like, no, they don't. No, they absolutely do not. You look at religions, you look at older ones too, and it's like,
Mhm.
no, the idea that everyone is equal in the eyes of God, all will be judged in the eyes of God equally. That didn't exist, and that certainly doesn't exist in a lot of religions. The divine right of kings,
Mhm.
the idea that every life is sacred and life itself is sacred. That is a Christian innovation.
Yeah.
That is New Testament Christianity did that specifically. You look at Rome, every life did not matter. Life was disposable. And there are plenty of cultures that same thing. Life really isn't all that important. It's whose life. Um,
Well, even
so
Old
the
Testament, there was a lot of that.
Oh yeah, the Old Testament is brutal. Exactly. And that's why I said that is a New Testament innovation.
Mhm.
And it's very, very important. Um, so yeah, that all kind of came about. And as far as my belief, okay, I'll be honest. I envy the security that religion gives the faithful. I
Mhm.
mean, it must be a wonderful feeling. I've seen death, so it's a very disturbing prospect at times. But it's something what am I going to do other than just yeah, I accept it. But at the end of the day, I have. I guess if I did have faith, I'd say that the faith comes down to we as a species, we've gotten this far. So clearly, there's faith in fellow man that we can do better, or that we can do these things, that we can achieve great things. So clearly, faith in my fellow man's there, um, as long as we retain our humanity. And then the second is, even with entropy, the universe veers towards more and more complex systems of order.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's enough. That's enough
Mm.
for me.
Um, so I'm kind of wondering too. You mentioned specifically a lot about Western society and whatever, but you can still see a lot of similar ideas coming out. Especially in Asiatic
Mhm.
um, myths and stories, and even when you get into the New World, when the Spanish and Portuguese were first coming over, you found similar myths like the world being destroyed in a flood and people on a boat and everything. Do you think that there's something that makes these sorts of stories extend even past what you could say is like Indo-European cultures?
Yeah. Well, I think the flood one's pretty easy, just like famine ones are pretty easy,
Hmm.
and that's that most cultures are plagued by them.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
that I'm sure every culture has had at least one or two just incredibly bad floods that might as well have been their entire world. Um, then of course the Nile, what flooded every year, so
Every
many
year, yeah.
years, yeah. So there was that. But what's interesting is that there was always it's the popular claim right now is that life started in Africa. Well, that doesn't seem to be so true anymore.
Hmm.
It really does seem like life probably started in the Fertile Crescent. Um, but if you were to take that perspective, you start looking at like Egyptian mythology and the themes, and those that came out of what Sumerian and I forget the other one. Um, you take Egyptian mythology and the concepts they had, and you can
Hmm.
see, okay, well, Judaism got all these ideas from the Canaanites and the Egyptians, and there's a handful of them where they had adopted these ideas into their own
Sure.
religion. Then you see links between the Chinese and the Egyptians as well, and the Greeks. The concept of the Ka and Ba seem to have, in a degree, carried over into China. And so there seems to be these threads where they link, where different aspects of these beliefs that probably started with, I guess, the original tribe of humans or humans in that area had a certain number of symbols and ideas that may have even been pre-human that just kept developing and spread it over time. Um, so to a degree, I would say a lot of it, these symbols are so old, they probably even to some degree predate the Ice Age.
Good possibility, I think.
Um, and then Kat's talked a lot about this thing called Raw 2, in which I forget who it was. Some team of scientists wanted to see with Egyptian technology if it was possible to sail to Central America.
Oh
And
yeah, Thor Heyerdahl. That was the guy.
okay, there you go. And while that's an incredibly controversial study, you look at the likeness between Egyptian mythology and Mayan,
Mm-hmm.
and it almost seems like Mayan religion comes across like an Egyptian death cult. Seriously, if you really look at it, it reads like an Egyptian death cult. You also, then there's the fact that you had the Asiatic people cross the ice bridge over into Alaska and come down. So, I think to some degree, it's genetic memory and just stories that had passed on and stuff that it's ingrained in our psychology.
Yeah, I almost want to say it is genetic because I've been thinking about like apocalyptic zombie films recently, and why are they so popular even though they keep coming up? And I think they're just like a modern day version of the Great Flood, or something like a Sodom and Gomorrah, that the city's just obliterated. I think
Yeah.
it's like a moral warning to people that shit could go down at any time. Make sure you're always prepared, and make sure you're living your life properly so that you're ready when this stuff happens.
Okay, then I've got a really interesting one for you as far as modern myths and archetypes that have buried their way into our brains that are recurrent. Okay.
Uh-huh.
After 1940, there seems to have been a legitimate consciousness change due to science and the war, and it seemed everything was being explained. I used to hear this in films, but apparently this was to a degree a legitimate thought that magic was dead, that stuff didn't exist anymore. But after World War II, with psychology and astronomy and nuclear physics and humans wielding the fire of the gods, essentially, the old visions of what scared us, the devil, changed. The witches kind of fell out of favor, but the view of the devil prior to the World War II was far more literal, apparently.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure apparently that still lives on to some degree in the South. The devil's a very real figure. But as time went on, as I've talked about, they started getting replaced first with aliens, right? Aliens started showing up more and more. The mythology of the gray aliens started to take shape all the way back in 1950. But in the 70s, the devil took a new form. And I've got a theory about this. The devil was either this kind of invisible manipulating force that was always around the corner, ready to toy with you or play upon your weakness, or the devil took the form of a child. The devil child became very popular. And to some degree, I kind of wonder if that was also kind of an existential dread of the boomers realizing they were getting old and suddenly they weren't kids anymore, and that those children they actually had to raise. But the devil child became a real common, that's ingrained in our cultural subconscious now. That is a recurring symbol. The gray alien thing started becoming more and more prominent through the 80s and 90s. And by the 90s, it seemed like we were at this time of peace, economic prosperity. Everything seemed fine. And the gray aliens seemed to be kind of indicative of this idea that things were going on behind the scenes that we didn't understand, that everything was under control, and people were unnerved by the stability. After 9/11, the grays were gone. Nobody talked about gray aliens anymore. It was all zombies.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because if we go back a little bit, um, in around the 1880s, when science really starts to pick up and it starts to really radically change the average person's life, that's when you start to see a movement towards more evangelical Christians,
Okay.
where everything is the Bible, everything in the Bible you have to take 100% literally. Whereas previous to that, a lot of people thought Bible stories were metaphor, or more like the traditional Catholic view, which is it's inspired by God, but it's not like God tapped Mark and he's like, "Hey, Mark, write this down." Um, so you start to see that, and you like at the same time you start to see Luddites, and as we progress, and science goes more one way, we start to see things going the other way. I was just watching Sons of Sam documentary on Netflix, which is about the son of Sam killing, and how, now some people at least say that there was more than one serial killer. But the guy who was researching it goes down into this whole rabbit hole of a rise in satanic cults around the 1960s and 1970s. So it seems like, as we progress more in science and a secular world, there are people who seem to need religion and religious structure more, both on the side of traditional Christianity, but then also people who like crave, they really want there to be magic, and they really want this kind of metaphysical power over others, mostly because they can't seem to get it in the real world, or they're at the top of, of course, they say a lot of people in Hollywood, which after living in LA wouldn't surprise me, but also a lot of political figures, they want to use this kind of satanic power to influence others.
Yeah, I used to think that was a joke, and I used to think that was paranoid conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is, the more and more people get exposed doing this stuff, it's like, well, yeah, maybe so. I mean, we know about the fact that Jack Parsons at JPL was into it, and what's his
Mm-hmm.
name from McDonnell Douglas was into Satanism. We know that Crowley was very popular with the rich.
Oh yeah.
And that apparently this goes back to at least Victorian era, that the rich had always been interested out of boredom in, the dark arts and things like that would be popular. Spiritualism would get popular. It was just the end thing to do. Supposedly, that's where the Addams family came from, is that they were making fun of the weird, morbid shit that the rich people in New York were into. And so, as I think Christopher Lee once put it, there are plenty of people that worship good. Why wouldn't there also be very terrible people that would worship evil? That makes sense. I mean, I guess there does seem to be something to it. I mean, we got Scientology, don't we?
Sure.
And yeah, there was a massive rise in, I guess, satanic and occult cults in the 60s and 70s. And that was an outgrowth of the 60s, the rejection of all Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
That was part of the whole hippie thing, was that they were started diving into that stuff. And you had the two sides of it. I mean, on the one end, you had Ken Kesey and his LSD fun in his bus of merry pranksters. And then you had the other bus, the black bus with the Manson family in it, who were Satanists.
Yep.
And they were both faces of the hippie movement. They really were. It's just no one really, I mean, what was it? The Rolling Stones had gotten into Satanism for a while, and it's just across the board.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you saw all sorts of experimentation. Everybody was going over to India and hanging out with these gurus, and there was just a lot of, I don't know, like tourist religious beliefs.
Yeah. And so getting back to your question, why do the new ones not endure? And I think the number one thing is, first, let's look at the modern myths that did endure.
Okay.
Because we do have modern mythology. And I don't just mean the myth of the zombie or the gray alien or what have you, or the Satan child. There are other myths such as, or fairy tales, the Wizard of Oz. I mean, people laugh when I say this, but the Wizard of Oz is an enduring American fairy tale. And it is so ingrained in a quintessentially American fairy tale that to this day, it is all over our language and our idioms, and it influences ideas we have. Yellow Brick Road, Man Behind the Curtain, Emerald, all of these things. I mean, the list goes on and on, that you can see it in our own language. I would say the same thing could be said of Star Wars, the original trilogy.
Yeah.
I mean, what's going on right now? The fans are defending that with a religious fervor. And why not? It is a modern mythology. It's not a whole lot different than when, was it the Pharaoh created Amun-Ra and said that they were monotheists, and only Pharaoh mattered now, and the rest of you were screwed. And the masses didn't like that. It was not very popular, and they reacted in revulsion. I'm not the one. I wish Kat was here, because this is kind of her. She's the Egypt fanatic. Then there was Star Trek. Star Trek has informed all these different aspects. You know, Mr. Spock is a descriptor of a personality now. You know, beam me up, beam me down is a phrase we use. I mean, when you've got people using it and they don't even know where it comes from, that does something. The invasion of the body snatchers and the term pod people, strangely enough, that is an ingrained myth that keeps showing up over and over again in different stories. It's that theme gets repeated. Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, same thing. These are myths. You're no Superman, or that's my kryptonite. These things have found their way into our culture. I think the only mistake right now is that only till recently did people start taking it seriously as, this is a modern mythology. They serve the same purpose. They allow us to talk about and think about bigger philosophical concepts by telling a very small story. Let me verbalize that better.
Okay.
The kryptonite, a weakness, right?
Yep.
It's a lot easier to say that's my kryptonite rather than saying, well, that over there is like, and then telling the story of Superman. That idiom, that phrase, right, or colloquialism, contains an entire story worth of information that allows us to talk about things. The man behind the curtain, same thing. That allows us to talk about a ton of things, or pod people, without having to lay out all these other ideas attached to it. And that is one of the key things that mythology had always done, is it allowed people to talk about bigger ideas. Getting back to Christianity, the thing that was so damn important about especially the New Testament was that allowed us a vocabulary to talk about what brought us to the modern, I guess, ethics we have, and our concept of law, and the building blocks of our civilization pretty much all came from that. Going a little further back to the Old Testament, the phrase, he's a snake, only means something because we all, on some level, know the Garden of Eden story. And it's a lot easier to say he's a snake rather than explaining, well, you can't trust this person. He's as corrupt as a devil who would, So that's what I would say as far as mythology is very important. And so that's what I would consider myth that is endured. Would you agree? Or
I think so. And I would add, I think, though, that mythology has sort of changed, specifically from around the 30s to the 50s,
Mhm.
especially in North America, because that's when you see the rise of comic books. And then simultaneously, you see really fantasy and sci-fi pick up. It's when Tolkien, when he started, and people really gravitated towards his work, looking for a new mythos.
Right.
And I was wondering if you think that there's some specific reason. I had a thought, and that's because the life changed. Like before, around the 1930s, most people lived a rural life out in the countryside, but that's about the time when we flipped over to having more people in urban settings. So our heroes had to, with the superheroes specifically, our heroes now had to be people who lived in a world that we could recognize, which is why so many are in New York or Metropolis or some city that looks like it. And then, just like we had more reactionaries with religion turning into more hardcore Christianity and Satanism, the Tolkien myths are people who want to go back to an earlier time in a total fantasy world that's very good and evil.
I would also say to some degree that there is a agrarian or Luddite fantasy woven
Mm-hmm.
into Tolkien, and
Oh yeah.
kind of the idea of you can go back to the Garden of Eden thought.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as old as time itself. Wanting to go back to that security of essentially childhood, of having protective parents and everything's provided, and
Mm-hmm.
that safety. So that's understandable. And there definitely was an industrialization metaphor going on in Tolkien. Yeah, I think that that's one of the reasons they latched onto it. I think that the 60s generation rejecting Western values in general left them with an empty void, because let's face it, communism's a pretty shitty religion to follow,
Definitely.
pretty empty one. And a lot of these pop religions and mysticism shit that they decided to grab onto was pretty hollow as well. I mean, they'd claimed to get into Hinduism or Buddhism, but it was only the very vaguest surface of it. It wasn't really the actual substance of the faith.
Right.
Um, okay, we've got a question here.
Oh, there's more comment. Ricky Joya, this might be just me, but I consider Rambo to be the modern myth of a tragic hero. If you're talking about First Blood, for sure.
Oh yeah, I would say so. And his redemptive arc, I guess, in the second film was fun and entertaining, but the first film I think is better.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think he would fall more in the realm of folklore than myth.
Yeah, that's true.
He's less of a mythic hero and more of a folk hero, I would say. That's just my opinion. You'd put him more in line with, I guess, what, Robin Hood maybe, or
John Henry.
John. Yeah, exactly. That's where I'd put that. I think also it really bothers me that people just keep saying, "Well, it's just comic books. It's just a movie." It's like, no. These are our hopes and dreams and fears.
Yeah, I think too. Well, there's definitely a reason why they don't understand it. But for the people who like comics, who liked the original Star Wars, who liked Star Trek, excuse me, there's a reason why they get so upset, because the values that are portrayed in those are ingrained in pretty much most of us, at least in our generation. And even the hippies of the 60s, there's a lot of those values deep down in them. Now, some have rejected those values, but inside they quote unquote know what's wrong and what's right.
I think that scares them.
Exactly. I think so too. And which is why, so let's say about from 2015 on, you see all these news stories. Like, I can't name a new classic run on at Marvel or DC. I can't really think of any comics that aren't indies that stick out. You have just complete wholesale trashing of classic movie properties. And I think a lot of it comes down to because now you have a younger generation that didn't really grow up with that classical education.
Right.
You know, people who don't know who Moses was, people who never read Paradise Lost or any of Chaucer or any of that stuff. So they don't know, and the only thing they know is people are telling them not to live their lives the way that they want to live their lives, even though in the long run it would end up better for them.
So infantile, you mean?
Yeah. So, do you know any rich people by any chance? I mean, not like $1 million, $2 million rich. I mean, like so rich they could start companies, run them into the ground, buy sports cars
No, I don't.
every year. Oh, I know some people who are like that, and their lives won't change, and neither will their grandkids. And they're all, well, there's a large proportion that are communists, but a lot of these kids are like they end up like the Japanese hikikomori, who like they can't leave their house. They're completely aimless, like they never complete any sort of education unless their parents, buy a degree or a high school diploma. And so, well, long story short, my brother has a kung fu school in Brazil, several of them, and I go there and I help him teach. And he's got a decent business with very successful parents who are like trying to whip their kids into shape any way possible. And we're not talking about like 5-year-olds; we're talking about like 20-something-year-olds. And these guys like no aim, no drive, and these are the kind of people who, if you criticize their vision of the world or criticize any of their actions, they get really pissy. Like a few years ago, I chewed a bunch of people out for, long story short, we were taking pictures in a room in China, and it was very, very hot. And they just all like snuck out the back, and it, made my brother lose a lot of face because everyone was like, oh, we want to take pictures with these foreigners. And I yelled at him like, what, why would you leave? You can't stand in a room for 10 minutes. And if you do that, who's going to be there for you? And some of them were really pissed at me for calling them out on it. And these are the same kind of people that I see in a professional sense, writing for big movie studios, getting published in books, writing comics.
Yes, actually, you know what? In retrospect, no, I thought you meant more on a actual friendship level.
Oh, no.
Have I met and interacted with?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And I can give you a rather horror story about it. I think really it has to do largely with a certain 1% culture that is thoroughly morally bankrupt. It's developed primarily in, I'm going to say 2 locations, really. Manhattan and Hollywood is the center of it. And then there's San Francisco, are the centers where this bizarre culture is formed. And they're all the sons and daughters of these ultra rich people that have succeeded. And they get involved in leftism because they think it gives them meaning. They think they're deep. They aren't.
Exactly.
They don't know anything. And they all come from a very, very close-knit community. So they don't have any actual connection to the real world. His name was Blake Libel, right? From Canada. I've got his IMDb, or not his IMDb, his Wikipedia entry right in front of me right now. But when I was at Archaea, they were bringing in all these rich 1%er type spoiled kids because they had money and they could fund themselves. They had connections in Hollywood and with the rich. And these people were getting opportunities they should have never had any business doing.
Oh, yeah.
Guys like Ditko and Kirby, they all earned their place, right?
Yeah.
They all had the talent. These people, daddy paid for it. tell you the truth, they're the same people that produced Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn, and it's the same circle of people. Strangely enough, it was also the same circle of people that produced people like Gloria Steinem, but these kind of rich, well, anyway. Blake, they had brought him into Archaea. They wanted me to be his artist. He had all these ideas. He was always ranting about how he was a political revolutionary, and he had all these big ideas, and he was a genius. And, he had these stories, and, he had some story about, oh, well, in the future, the evil the evil rich white capitalists would have everybody living in pods. Yeah. Eating protein packs in slavery while they leached off the world. And this time traveler goes back in time, and he gets the best activists through history, so that he brings a real 1970s feminist to liberate the women, and he brings a Black Panther, right? This was his story.
So it's like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure with activists?
Right. And he just thought he was a genius. And then he had another character called the Psychobomb, and it was essentially Iron Man, but he was like a bloodthirsty killer. And that he just went around killing people who he knew were going to do evil things. And his motivation for all of you, every time he'd always just start talking about the children. It was always for the children or the working class. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Blake Libel, son to notable Canadian families, Lauren Libel and prominent Jewish real estate mogul, the Libel family, recently was arrested this is from the paper, arrested for murdering his girlfriend in his apartment in West Hollywood.
Ooh,
Libel was
Jesus.
taken into police custody when they found the corpse of his fiancée, a 13-year-old Ukrainian former tax prosecutor and model. She was found mutilated, drained of blood, and lying on the bed. Their infant daughter, do you see where? Yeah. It was,
wow.
When I found out this guy, great warrior of the people here, what did he do? This spoiled rich kid, part of apparently this real estate empire in Canada, murders his girlfriend, but yet he's a feminist.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There's when people say Me Too is like a bunch of nonsense, I really think it makes total sense that it came out of Hollywood. You think about it, there's a term for women having to sleep with people to get in movies. It's called the casting couch. Mm-hmm. There's no, in comics, there's a lot of hinky stuff going on, but we don't have a term like, oh, he took her to the spinner rack or something, and when you're working in an insurance company, it's never like he took Janice to the copy room.
I'm going to be brutal. I'm going to say it's the other way around in comics. And I know this is not a popular point of view. In Hollywood, it's, oh, you want to roll in the movie? Take your clothes off, right?
Uh-huh.
I swear to God, this is my opinion. Anyone out there who's offended, you can be offended. I've seen it plenty. It's, you let me write the book, I'll fuck you.
Oh my God.
It's the other way around. These women come in there knowing these dudes have never been touched. And then a couple years later, once they've got a name, they meet to the dude.
Yeah. But, if you're in an environment where everywhere you go, it's all about using people for sexual purposes, and you live in like the acting community or something like that, it makes total sense why you think the rest of the world is like that. And not to say nothing like that ever happens outside, but the worst I've seen in corporate environments, has been more like somebody telling inappropriate jokes or like, bruh, she's not interested in you, knock it off. That's in general where it ends. So, when people live in an environment like this, it totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, I would say I'm not shocked in the least that the Manhattan elite and Hollywood have this view that all men are horrible, terrible people. Because look at the environment they're in.
Yeah, of course they are.
And you hear these women going on and on about it. So like, lady, have you ever actually been to the suburbs? Have you ever actually gone to a working class neighborhood? No, it is not like that.
Uh, so getting back to myths a little bit, um, do you what sort of myths do you think are sort of like primed for a comeback? Like
Prime.
what haven't we seen in a while? Either like in the traditional form, or like a redo, like a new comic book hero or a new kind of movie with that classic structure. Like what sort of myths do you think we're ready for?
Well, I would say it's just like the 1970s when it was kind of a morally bankrupt era. Everyone was pretty much feeling like society was coming to an end and that everything had failed. Um, you know, you had a shitty Democrat president who had got us in wars, who pretended to be a good socialist, but was just draining the country dry and a complete moron. And everyone just pretty much felt the party was over. Artistically, everything was kind of falling apart. Star Wars came out, the
Mm-hmm.
classic hero. And you look at what people are really loving out of Japan. My Hero Academia has been like probably one of the biggest properties to come about in the last 25 years. Um, I'm sure there are others, but I'm not really up on it. Um, I don't know. What are some other things from the anime world that people are just thoroughly obsessed with?
Currently, well, let me see. There was Goblin Slayer a year or two ago,
Yeah.
which was really interesting. Man, what else is going on now? Demon Slayer is big. I never understood the popularity of that one.
Okay.
And then there's some that are a little older. There's still a huge fandom for Full Metal Alchemist
There you
and
go. I
mhm.
think really what people are craving are classic heroes and morality tales. That we
Yeah.
have lost the idea. In fact, morality in general is gone from our media, our mainstream
Mhm.
media. If you want to find any sense of a moral compass or a allegory, they don't exist outside of the indie world.
Yes.
Um, yeah, at the end of the day, I think people are craving heroes that are heroes, stories that bring meaning to their lives, bring hope, give them perspective, and that we people are really, really sick of these empty, self-indulgent, infantile sociopaths who don't care about anything. They're all nihilists. I think we're done with it. People are there's look, it's failing across the board. It may kill Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Just the continual failure over and over again, and that image of the morally bankrupt. Oh, the villains are really the good guys.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood's really is willing to die on that hill, which tells me how much that lie matters to them, that the villains are really the heroes.
Well, I think it's a little bit different. I think they genuinely do not understand that these characters are villains. So, for example, I think a lot of them, when the X-Men movies came up, they looked at Magneto, and Magneto is, ostensibly in a war against humans because he saw his Jewish family killed in the
Yeah,
concentration camps. So they therefore think like, oh, that's a good thing. Whereas, the average person would be like, oh yeah, he's totally got a reason, but you can't go around murdering people. People
right.
still recognize Magneto as the villain. And even in Claremont, he had the whole arc of where Magneto was kind of heading towards good, giving up the murdery thing while still protecting mutants.
Well, Jim Lee was the one that screwed that up. Claremont had redeemed him. Um, Really, the one thing that disappoints me with Magneto, and I wish so badly that they had done it, was the actual moment in the comic book where Magneto has become so obsessed with his idea of protecting mutant kind that he's got Kitty Pryde and he's about to kill her, and he sees the Jewish star around her neck and he's like, oh my god, I've become what I hate.
Yeah.
And that was the moment he stopped. He saw what he had become, and that that is a redemption arc if there ever was one.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also something that we're missing, is that leftism doesn't believe in redemption at all. Yes. Lord of the Rings is a redemptive story in a lot of ways. And I think, well, he was a Catholic, so of course there's redemption. Myself, maybe it's because my mother tried to raise me Catholic. Maybe this is why I myself am very partial to redemptive heroes. I still, of all the Marvel movies, I think my favorite's still the first Iron Man, where he's not a terrible person. He's just an amoral one. And when he sees what he is, his arc is redemptive. And and he uses his mind to fix the damage I loved it. Mm-hmm. I think we're also probably in need of more redemptive heroes. The idea that no, just because you fucked up all your life doesn't mean you can't turn a leaf and do better.
Yep. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering.
Joni, in the original X-Men, now maybe in that issue, I forget, Kitty Pryde just always wear a Star of David around her neck. Did you not know that? But anyway.
It's kind of interesting. Back then, almost every Marvel character had some kind of religion.
Yeah, what was it? Yeah, a lot of them were openly, what was it? Daredevil was absolutely a Catholic hero.
Yeah.
There was Thing, but of course he was Jack Kirby. Thing was essentially Jack's standing character, so of course he was Jewish. He was kind of the working class Jewish guy. They even did it with Moon Knight, didn't they? They kept him Egyptian, didn't they?
Yeah. He was Egyptian. I think Danny Rand was like some sort of a Buddhist, Confucius, Taoist mix.
Oh, that's cool. Interestingly enough, completely off topic. You were asking, I just can't deal with the faith aspect. It just doesn't really process with me. Mm-hmm. The one place that I do actually find some solace is I look at the concept of impermanence in Buddhism and take that to heart. Is it's why we have meaning. It gives a meaning that it's impermanent, but that's just an aside.
I think you're absolutely right. Even in like Japanese culture, when you have traditionally you'd have like a tea ceremony, and they'd have like a field of or some plots of flowers growing outside of the home. When a guest would come, they would cut down all the flowers and then just put one in a vase in front of them during a tea ceremony. So they get the pleasure of temporarily having this one object of beauty. And in my opinion, it's one reason why nostalgia is so powerful, and why some people want to keep rebooting old series which should probably be left alone, right. Is because it's the time and the place and the people you were with that makes whatever that was so great. Like, I bet a bunch of us used to watch kung fu movies on Kung Fu Theater, right? And it was because you were in that age, you didn't really have a lot of responsibilities. You're hanging out with your friends, making fun of things. And that's why those movies are so great.
Oh, I agree. Well, okay, that and just the choreography of the fighting is just incredible. It's an art form in itself. But yeah.
That was amazing, yes.
But yeah, absolutely. We need, our culture is craving meaning, because we have had, since the 60s, the steady path from, I'm going to say it, the flower children, stripping our culture dry of anything of substance or meaning. And this whole hatred of Western culture and this whole rejection of mom and dad, I think really it does come back down to bizarre mom and dad issues in some way, but we're left wanting. I mean,
it's the child that's too indulged.
Right.
They can't seem to find a way through the right to what is best for them and what is not, and they scream a lot when you try to get them on the right path.
Yeah. And an interesting thing for the book I'm writing is I talk about when Gloria Steinem used Wonder Woman on the cover of Ms. Magazine, right? And I'm not a fan of Steinem by any means, but that was a wonderful thing for the character. It actually brought her back to her roots and made her a great character again. But in doing that, it's pretty much kicked off a civil war in feminism.
Yeah.
That was the spark that caused the Gloria Steinem kind of powerful woman, don't need no man, going to be a business, single woman who can do it all and be beautiful. Feminism went to war with the political lesbians and the Marxists and the radicals. That kicked off the war, and then the Wonder Woman show just made it worse. And it's weird is that war never ended.
Sure.
And one of the things the Marxists of the feminist or the women's lib movement flat out said is they put out this press release that said that feminism doesn't need mythological heroes or supernatural women to look up to, that those things are damaging to women and detrimental, and that the real hero should be the most common average woman there is, who is down to earth. And that there should only be a celebration of all average women. Lowered expectations.
Yeah. There's hey, it's just about Olympic time. There's a reason everybody loves the Olympics. And it's because you get to see people who have, sort of lived these hero journeys of giving up a lot of free time, working hard, overcoming a lot of adversity. Those always make the best stories when you're watching the Olympics, and you want to see the people who work that hard, even if they succeed or they trip and fall or whatever. Everybody has like a great admiration for them, and I think it really helps people in their daily lives, because it gives you something to shoot for too, at least much more than like pro sports, who a lot of them are just so entitled.
Yeah. They're not. Yeah, the Olympians are all kind of new. They aren't celebrities for the most part.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of them are,
and they're representing our country.
Exactly. So they're kind of like almost part of us, or what we wish we could be for ourselves.
Yeah. Well, we need to excel towards something.
Yes. Well, and I think, getting back to Miss, traditionally, this was, a way that a culture would instill these beliefs and values. And, you had Achilles, you should be brave and you should be strong, but you shouldn't be too arrogant about it, and Zeus was really a warning tale for all men, especially after you get into what Hera would do.
Yeah.
So, and it just seems like that's one reason why people are so hungry for things, is because all these new stories are very empty. They're not pointing you to anything. And I think a lot of it too is many people inherently sense what is, really kind of right and what is wrong, but you need an affirmation like, yes, I'm doing the right thing. No, or I should stop doing this wrong thing. And a lot of times it's these modern days TV shows and movies and stuff that would sort of instill the confidence that, yes, this is what I'm doing, and I think it really hurts everybody in general when that's taken away.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. All fiction, actually communication in general is about shared reference points. And we all need these shared reference points to be able to communicate with each other. And we've seen such a fracturing that, like I said, Twilight fans don't know that Twilight didn't invent werewolves.
That's true.
If someone's never heard the story of the Garden of Eden, he's a snake may not mean a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, yeah, we need stories that reaffirm our culturally shared values and identity. And there's a real war on that right now. The idea that there should be any individual identity as well as a national identity. That I don't know. It's weird. At the one end, they want a bajillion genders, but they want everyone to just kind of be this gray mass of nothing.
Yeah. And I'm wondering too. So earlier you had mentioned that you think one of the reasons why this newer stuff doesn't persist is before we had reruns and everything. But do you think it's generational too? Because one thing I've noticed is previously, let's say starting about the 20s and 30s, you had films, and there were only a certain number of films, so everybody would kind of go see the same stuff. And then when TV came about, there were only really 3 channels around. So everybody, kind of saw the same shows. And and still into like the Generation X, we had more channels, but most of them were kind of garbage. So people mostly watch the same things. But like as we're getting to now, there's kind of a lot. And I'm wondering if all these stories and myths are only like one generation deep. Like there's a whole generation that knows Aang from The Last Airbender, or maybe Harry Potter. But then as we're going now, you and I could be watching totally different things and won't have that common reference point. So do you think it's generational too, and that we're losing the ability to talk out of very small clicks?
Yeah, I would say that we are fractured to the point that, it's one thing to have a subculture or a few subcultures. It's another thing where everyone's been divided down into tiny balkanized groups and nobody knows what anybody's saying anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What was it? The Tower of Babel was built so that everyone could, the idea is we'd all have one language.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like instead we have gotten to the point where nobody knows what anyone's saying anymore. We don't relate to anybody. As far as Gen X is concerned, I think a large part of it also is due to parents. I wonder if maybe the Barney generation had overprotective parents that didn't want them to see anything.
Yes.
So they didn't get to see Rambo. They didn't see Alien. They didn't, they weren't allowed to see anything violent. They weren't allowed to see anything that might be sexist. They might not, they're not allowed to see anything from the 50s or I Love Lucy because that might damage them. That may be a large part of it. And I do see with Gen X, at least, we all had, well, I didn't, but Gen X seems to generally have come in 2 groups. The ones that had kids early and were pretty much fuck ups. And then the rest of us waited till late in life to have kids. So, yeah, it's almost like we skipped a generation. A lot of the millennials were actually second chance babies from the boomers, or, the first generation of millennials were Gen X kids from, let's face it, teen parents and people who probably shouldn't have popped a kid out so quickly.
Yeah.
And now we're finally getting this wave of the late babies. And the parents that I've seen, now this is my personal experience, so it's limited. I'm seeing a real vested interest in parents spending time with their kids, showing them movies, showing them the classics. It's an experience for mom and dad to sit their kids down and show them the original Star Wars trilogy. It's a big deal for them. It's kind of a bonding ritual. Or, Janelle had talked about how they've been having this wonderful time with their child, showing them, original anime series from the 80s that, okay, I grew up on this, and sharing that experience with them, or introducing them to the Batman animated series for the first time, or, going further back, look at The Wizard of Oz. So we may see a change with the next generation with parents that are actually educating their kids on our culture.
That's an interesting point. I do think you're right about that. I mean, we do see. It's interesting to say that media of today not only needs to compete among its peers, but it also has to compete with the past, which it's getting trounced.
Oh yeah.
We do have new stuff that really takes its cues. Like I saw Ryan Wynn in the chat earlier. He's got his great series Gods and Gears, published by Alterna.
Really? Let me go look that up.
Oh man, it's fantastic. It's hard to explain, but it's got a really Indiana Jones or Goonies vibe to it.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I'm
Oh, yeah,
always
you
on the
should definitely
lookout
get
for
it.
good modern indie comics I can recommend because there just aren't enough.
Alterna's putting out a lot of good stuff. Gods and Gears had a little misfortune that some of the issues started to come out around the time of when COVID really came out.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them got delayed, but the first 4 issues are out. And he's also got an indie book in the same universe, Hammerella on Indiegogo. So anyone who's interested, go check that out. But it's like
Does
the
he
same kind
illustrate
of
these
thing.
or just write them?
So Ryan, he's probably most famous as an inker.
Okay.
He is illustrating Hammerella. He's working with Dean Kotz. Yeah, Dean Kotz for Gods and Gears. Although Ryan did he wrote it and he's doing the colors.
Ryan, when you're free, I want to talk to you. No, I'm looking at this. This is great.
It's
This is
awesome.
beautiful. I'm looking at Hammerella right now. You are a very skilled man, sir. Congrats. Let me post my. Oh, I'm on Kat's account. Okay, you're going to see it from Kat. I'm going to post my email. Please contact me when you're free. Okay, so anyway.
I'll send him a message later if you want.
What's his name again? Ryan?
Ryan Wynn.
Okay, cool. So anyway, about Ryan.
Sorry. Getting back to it, you were talking about how parents are really taking an interest in the cultural education of kids. Yeah, and I agree, and I think that you are correct, and I'm kind of wondering how the battle between old media and this new stuff is going to end up. Just because you were talking about reruns before, but shows like the X-Files was not really competing against reruns of Leave It to Beaver.
No.
But now the modern stuff is in a lot of ways. People still want to watch Friends, not whatever's on now.
Well, I think part of the problem is that Hollywood's gotten to this point of view where they want to make one movie and have everyone see it. They don't have this idea. They want one film to be all things to all people. They want the entire audience. The idea of niche audiences they don't like anymore, which is, a recipe for horrible, horrible storytelling. But then also Disney specifically wants to go out of their way to wipe away and get rid of old films and make them unavailable so that you don't have to compete with themselves. Yeah, that should tell you everything you need to know about them.
Yeah, well, thank God for sailing the high seas of the internet with.
Oh yeah,
making sure you don't walk the gangplank. If you all know what I'm talking about.
But yeah, I think that parents taking an active role in what their kids are seeing would probably do wonders for us, rather than trusting whatever garbage Hollywood's pumping out like a new He-Man.
Yeah, it's interesting too because I see a trend for more homeschooling, like a lot more homeschooling, especially here in Southern California. I've seen some of the stuff that is being taught out here, and a lot of people are like, "Holy shit!" and they're taking their kids out right away.
Oh, good. So that's finally caught on.
Well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The problem is some people, they have to have 2 people working.
Right.
Because they like having stuffs, and it's so expensive here. But I definitely see bigger movements, out. I think it was Missouri. They just had a thing where now funding goes directly to the kids instead of to schools. So you could use, I think it's like 20 grand a year for homeschool or to get tutors or whatever. I think there were two states, like maybe Missouri and New Hampshire. I'd have to double check, but for sure there were two that just passed it last year.
Well, it seems that most of the people I know that are parents are all going down the route of homeschooling.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes me wonder, um, about the new media, because there's tons of old stuff, but everybody wants something kind of new, and you want stories that reflect the world that you live in. So, do you think we're going to see sort of a renaissance in traditional structured myths? And what do you think they're going to look like? Like, do you think it's going to come out of Hollywood? Do you think it's going to be in indie novels and indie comics?
That's the big question that everyone, look, if I could answer that, I'd be rich. Okay.
Yeah.
If I could answer that, everyone would be buying Case File Arkham right now.
That's true.
So I couldn't really say what the next big twist is. I've said it multiple times. Comicsgate had such a potential to be that, and then they dropped the ball for infighting. But really, yeah, some sort of alternate, parallel, competing media needs to rise up, because the old establishment, the old infrastructure is completely corrupted. It's garbage. It's cancer. There's no point in even working in it. I see a lot of promising things within the independent publishing. What there needs to be at this point is some sort of coherent linking counterculture that will lead people to find other things. One of the things that, about countercultures of the past, like I was in the whole goth industrial thing, or for that matter in the 90s, it was called alt culture, because all the various alternative scenes kind of mixed and crossed over. And in that there was a social aspect to it. So, if you wore a t-shirt of a certain band, you would start meeting people and they say, hey, well, have you checked this out? That's what we're missing right now.
I don't know. I think it's really starting to develop. So I, of course, have not put out any products yet. But, I talk to a lot of people in the comics world. I talk to a lot of people in role-playing game worlds as well, and D&D and a few others. And there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of people who, they play role-playing games, but they really like the art from comics. And then I see a lot of people who, are writing or illustrating comics, who they sort of see what's going on, like not the Wizards of the Coast nonsense, but a lot of the other, potential from role-playing games, which, by the way, is where I think culture is going to sort of resurge. But and it seems like these groups are sort of getting together.
They're finally talking to each other.
Yeah, I mean, in the US, it's very interesting because everything is sort of balkanized. Like, visual artists hang out with visual artists, musicians hang out with musicians, authors hang out with authors. Whereas if you look at Britain, everybody in any sort of art scene knew each other in London. Poets would hang out with musicians, would hang out with sculptors. And I kind of see that more as starting over here. And I think part of it is just because, like, no one wants to be lectured. You want to hang out with someone and be like, oh, hey, that thing's cool. What are you doing? Tell me about that. And, you don't want to hear a lecture from that person.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I think there's hope in that regards.
What we need is basically a community that starts producing their own, not only their own content, where that's already happening. Really, the thing is some sort of coherent press where people are getting their information about what these books are. Hey, this is where you can read non-woke books, and than our own meeting places. Unfortunately, our comics conventions and our gaming companies and our comics companies that we built, frankly, have been hijacked, and we've got to build a new house.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to come. I don't know where it's going to come from. I mean, you need to hit a sort of a critical mass. I don't know if it's going to be someone like Ethan Van Sciver, who's got like a bajillion subs and, you know, a couple million in sales in the last few years.
I'm going to be vicious. He lost that. That ship passed.
Well,
I wish I could be more optimistic.
Someone's got to get a bunch of money.
He could have been it. He could have been it.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Could have been him.
I understand what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree. But we need to get somebody who's sort of like that to start having these things. Do you know who Penny Arcade is?
Yeah, I'm familiar with them.
So, you know, they did their whole online webcomic thing years ago, and then they just started having, you know, video game shows because what was that, E3, the one in Las Vegas? You know, they just became too corrupt and too corporate media, and then theirs took off. Now you can make the argument that theirs is, you know, became what it was fighting against. But I do think that that audience is still there, and there will be people who want to come and, you know, see authors talk without all the shenanigans, and they want to see independent games. And
what it is the fans have to make it happen.
Yeah.
You know, creators like ourselves, I have tried. If you're creating content, doing your own conventions and making your own news source and all that other stuff, those are multiple jobs. You need to sleep, you know?
Yeah.
Fans need to stop going back to their abusive boyfriends who are shitting on them and beating them up and saying, here, continue to eat this shitty content we're making. They need to stop doing that and take it upon themselves to do their own conventions and their own news sources and start buying the books that actually respect them and produce good content.
Definitely.
That's really that's the missing piece right now, is that the fans need to actually get out there and do it themselves. That's where San Diego Comic-Con came about. That was a fan creation. Now, the comics companies were a little different because most of them were actually originally fronts for mafia money. But
well, hey, you know, nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
Maybe we need a little organized crime to start things back up.
That actually might be true.
Things were a lot safer.
That's true too. So I don't know. I feel like this is kind of winding down. Is there anything else do we have questions or anything?
Yeah. Anybody have questions in the audience? So we have Owen's talking about Beetle Blaze.
Oh, Owen. Or you or were there anything we didn't cover or anything you still
you know, I think that was about everything for me today. I'm sure I'll think of like 5 things after we hang up. But yeah, that was most of my questions for picking your brain on myths and why modern myths suck.
Okay, actually, we got a question from Just a Passerby. Why is the moment of even Ethan Van Sciver passed? Honestly, the stench of war campaign. Simply, there's too much ill will. There's too much baggage now, and there's a whole lot of hurt feelings and a lot of trust is gone. And we need someone who's going to bring people together, inspire confidence, and continue to get people to want to create content, to get people excited. You know, the fact that we don't want everyone screaming at each other. You know, that's the problem. Is at some point, Comicsgate was resembling what we were supposed to be fighting. So that's why.
So
I don't want to get too controversial here.
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So Michael Connor says CG Crowd is doing For the Fans Fest in Orlando. So Michael, you know, I've heard that for like the last 2 years. Is it actually happening, or is it just like we should do this kind of thing. If he's here. Yeah, so I remember them talking about that in 2019, I think. And then
Yeah.
I think they wanted to try it last year, but due to COVID, they couldn't. But I don't know if anybody actually planned anything.
I don't know. Maybe there's a chance of all that bad blood being healed. I honestly don't know. Like I said, when it just became when it was everybody was fighting everyone, I just checked out and said, I'm not here for that. I'm here to make books. So I left.
Sure. No, I mean, hey,
and I'll tell you the other thing. No, this is coming from the heart here. There's another reason I left. And that was the one time when I got angry and I said something that was incredibly rude and stupid and that I really shouldn't have. And I let that social media anger get to me, and I was an asshole. That got me more attention and sales than anything else I'd ever fucking done with the movement, and that made me sick.
Oh,
I said, I'm here. No, this is not good.
Yeah. But, there are definitely not as strongly aligned as like Comicsgate is or was, or however you want to phrase it. But there still are a bunch of people who just like hanging out, talking about comics.
I mean, there was a period there with Comicsgate too, where, I was just for the hell of it. I would see new people trying stuff, and I would just say, okay, here's why your lettering's having trouble, and I would send them an email, give them some visual demonstrations, or even just kind of walk them through how to do their lettering. And I had other people do the same, saying, okay, well, your marketing needs this. We need that to come back.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's,
when we had one of the big names of Comicsgate, I won't name him, flat out saying, no, the blood sports are good for sales. It's like, I'm not here for blood sports. I'm here I'm for friends. I'm here for friends.
That's a very short-term goal, and I'm sure it was, well, like you just said, you had more sales when you said that thing, but it's definitely self-defeating in the long term, which is unfortunate.
Well, yeah, I'd rather be right with myself than getting into some sort of hip-hop rap battle feud, tearing someone else down to make sure that I'm in the press.
I mean, I have to admit, it would have been a lot cooler if it was a hip-hop rap battle.
Yeah.
So quick question from Dominic Powell: what will cause the renaissance of classic myth and storytelling to flourish as people are waking up to the nonsense?
Buying the books, watching the movies, stop giving Disney money. Stop going to Hollywood films.
Yeah.
Stop buying Marvel and DC.
There is definitely a financial component to it. One is stop giving money to the people who are, crapping on you. But the other thing is putting your money into these indie sources that you like. If I hate to say it, but many people, they've got day jobs. They would love to be making content full time, but you got to pay the bills. And to some extent too, it's hard to tell, in some ways it's hard to tell the fan response. So I just, I made a reference to pirating things earlier. If you like the work people are doing, buy it. If you can't find a way because you're in a country that it won't ship to, or it's not legally licensed, find some other way, buy merch, give them a tip on a PayPal thing, or I think you can tip people on Indiegogo or Kickstarter, support them with your voices and to the extent that you can with your dollars. Because if people are getting, high fives in text chats, that's one thing. But when they see like, oh, people really like my stuff enough to put $5 into it, that really lets them know that sort of they're on the right path and that they should be producing more of this content.
That, and I think we also need to get past $40 books that only deliver 24 pages.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I've had chats with a lot of people about this. John Hervey, who does Black Tiger, we were talking about it. His first book was a compilation of previously published Black Tiger material. It was 176 pages that I think was like $25 or $30. And his current Indiegogo that just ended last weekend is over 100 pages for I think it was $25. So it seems to me that the standard of what people are willing to pay is changing, and you really need to have, like 4 to 5 floppies worth of material for people to buy a graphic novel.
And that's what I will say, everyone. Anything that I'm selling, any of my graphic novels, they're complete graphic novels. All of them at least 100 pages or more, and never more than $20.
And where can people buy those?
Amazon.com. Case File Arkham 1 and 2. Go get it. World War Kaiju as well.
All right. And I think maybe we'll do one last quick question from Owen. Where does Guyver fit in mythology?
I believe that the Guyver in your personal mythology, Owen, factors very, very large, right next to Christ. I don't know. Did Guyver make a large cultural impact? Really, the thing is about these myths is that they need to endure. You know how at the time everyone said, Hunger Games is going to be like the next Fahrenheit 451?
Nah.
And it really, where is it now? I mean, we kind of remember it, but it's really the one that left a legacy is Harry Potter.
Yeah.
That's being treated with religious significance, which I think is taken way too far, but there you go. It had that impact.
Not all religions were subtle.
Yeah. The fact that there are people who register their religion as Jedi is what I mean by impact.
Yes.
These things have endured to the point that they've woven their way into the language. I don't think bio-boost armor has ever really found its way into the modern lexicon. So really, I would say as far as myths are concerned, the ones that endured from Japan, we've got Akira and Ghost in the Shell, both of which have greatly affected us. Sailor Moon, massive influence. We're going to give it a few more years, but it's looking like Naruto may have had the same impact as well.
That was
strangely enough.
Yeah, that was one I could never get into for some reason.
I never watched it. I have no idea, so I couldn't even begin to comment.
I had flashbacks from the Finger of Death, but all right. So I think this is probably a pretty good place to wrap it up. So Ishi, just hang on for a second. We'll say goodbye. But for everyone else, if you like the stream, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and let us know in the comments what you thought and what would you like to see next on the show. So, all right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.